And we are live. Thank you very much for your support if you're joining us live or on replay. Let me remind you that this is part of our ongoing video series where we try to find ways to help you find and use the best information, expertise, and finance. Our role at UMI is to help you go further. Today, the subject matter that I want to tackle is SEO and online reputation. And the best person to join me would be my friend Stephen Parker from Digital Allies. Hi.
Hi, Pascal. How are you?
I'm very good. I've been looking forward to this. You and I have done each other for quite some time. We're not going to mention a number of years.
Yeah.
And what I wanted to do really is discuss with you how we, as small business owners, can get ready for 2020, which I think is going to be an important year when it comes to search engine services and how they're going to try to provide a better service to the searchers.
Okay, yeah.
Can we start by a bit of going back in history? Can you remember when you first came across the term SEO and the practice of search engine optimization, and what has been the journey since then to lead you to become the managing director and founder of Digital Allies?
Yeah, so going back over 15 years ago now, I started at NCJ Media, which is a chronicle and journal, over in Newcastle, and then kind of worked into their digital team. And as I got exposure to one of their property platforms, actually, that was when I first came across the phrase SEO. So that's probably about 12 years ago now. And then about 10 years ago, I moved to what was then a small dedicated SEO agency, and I've just loved it ever since. And then, you know, for me, coming from a print background with the chronicle and journal, it was pretty much like night and day to be able to see exactly how many people were coming from Google, making inquiries or buying things, and I could directly give an ROI figure, which was brilliant. And from then I was hooked. So then, you know, Digital Allies was set up 4.5 years ago now, and we're a full service digital marketing company across SEO, web design and development, Google Ads and data analysis, as well as content generation as well. So yeah, I guess I've never looked back, but kind of dedicated working in SEO for over 10 years now.
That's excellent. Do you know, that reminds me, certainly I started my life as a marketer 2 years before the internet became or started. So it was print media, it was radio advertising and so on. And by comparison, we were working blind. I don't know how you felt about it from your print media days. By comparison, it was very much the, you know, I would say informed guesses about the audience behavior.
Well, the sell back then was, you know, you need to be in the paper every day or every week or every month. So it became quite a compelling sale, but clients didn't actually know if it was working. So they didn't know that if it was a causal effect. So as in, you know, so I put an advert in, do people come into the store or come and buy or inquire or whatever? It was at best a guess, basically. So yeah, being able to directly attribute a spend to a return is, I guess, the beauty of digital as a whole, particularly from an SEO point of view as well.
Do you remember which search engine you started with? Because Google was the last one to come on in the marketplace.
One of them, yeah, absolutely. For me, it was Yahoo. Flirted with the likes of Ask Jeeves and Lycos, and AltaVista was actually widely regarded as the first search engine. But I never actually used that personally. And then I think pretty much as everyone kind of graduated towards Google in the early 2000s, I kind of went over there as well. So yeah, been using Google for probably over 15 years now.
Oh goodness, I mean, I started with AltaVista for sure, then moved on to Yahoo. I had probably just sort of sheer misplaced loyalty was using Ask Jeeves from time to time, and then moved on to Google. And to our viewers and listeners, of course, many of the advice and conversation we're going to have in a moment will refer to Google, but that extension, please understand, those tactics will work on Yahoo and Bing as well, which have, you know, a share and actually a very loyal following. I mean, I've got some friends who are kind of strong, you know, Bing users and will not touch Google.
Yeah, and if you think about, you know, kind of Bing now power Yahoo results, so technically they're one and the same. But also, you know, as new devices ship out, so new Microsoft devices, particularly that run the Microsoft operating system, they will have Bing installed as their default search engine. So, you know, I think, you know, Bing is there, and it's certainly part of what we use, but it's a very small element, typically around about a 5% market share in the UK. And it's a bit bigger in the US. I think we've got about a 20% market share there or thereabouts in the US. But predominantly across the whole of the Western world, the dominant force is Google.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, so the reason we're together is that I need your help to help me and help our audience think through what's going to happen next year and the year after in terms of the changes, in terms of the search engine, so that if we know what's going to happen in advance, we can maybe put things in place for the next few months so that we're ready for those changes. So based on obviously your experience, your day-to-day supporting customers, and of course from the headlines that from the Google I/O conference and more, what is happening soon that we need to know about as small business owners?
So, in the whole, if you think about Google's role, it's to deliver useful responses to queries that searchers perform, right? So that's the first part of it. But the second part of it is to increase their revenues and drive shareholder value. So we can never forget that. So Google's drive towards commercializing its searches is a driving force behind it. So if you think about, like I said, typically in the Western world, they've already reached there or thereabouts 90% in most territories in the Western world that they're already in. So by having a 90% market share, there aren't a huge amount of users left to come onto the platform, and those who aren't probably won't. So their drive now is to, I guess, increase the potential yield from each search that's done, because it's like the proverbial flying aeroplane with the empty seats. Once that search has been performed, there's no way they can reclaim any money from that search in the future. So rather than trying to reach new audiences from them, what I've certainly noticed, typically in the last probably 5 years, is that advance towards commercializing their searches ever more. And we've seen that action and changes in paid search. So over the last few years, Google Shopping was free. They then moved that into Google Ads. So, instead of having a free shopping listing, you now have to pay for them, and they're advancing that even more now. And you've seen, where the ads were kind of in a fairly opaque yellow box with sponsored links right at the top, and then down the right-hand side, they removed all of that. So now the ads are shown on a totally transparent background with a small little green label that says ad. So the distinguishment between an organic result and an ad is far few. So, socially and I guess culturally, we're almost conditioned to say that ads are an annoyance. So they typically are an intrusive part of another experience. So if I'm watching the TV, I'm watching it for the program, not for the ads, right? So by Google changing that, they appear far more so as an organic result, and therefore click-through rates on the paid ads have actually increased in doing so. And also I noticed in the last week, actually, which is really quite current, is that it actually increased, and I'm not sure if it was just a test or whether they've actually rolled it out or will roll it out, they actually increased the font size of the text on the results page. Now, as a consequence of that, the organic results were pushed even further down the page. So from a scrolling point of view, you'd have to scroll further before you reach an organic result than if you were to click on an ad.
Right.
So, now that's not to say organic is dead, far from it, absolutely far from it. It's still the largest driver of traffic to each of the websites that we work on. So, but there will be looking to drive more and more revenue. So that's kind of, that's one of the things on a commercial sense. I guess on what's changed more recently, in the more recent past, we've moved to something called mobile first indexing. So what that means is basically Google will come and view the mobile version of your website first. Okay, so they're still viewing the desktop separate, but first they will come to your mobile and then move on to a desktop. So the mobile aspect of SEO has played a far greater role, certainly in the last 12 to 18 months, as well as page speed. So how fast your site loads, and sometimes there are factors that are outside of your control in terms of that, or a business's control. But basically, making sure that it's coded correctly, that the images, which we'll come on to shortly, that the images are compressed well, the site's coded cleanly, and there's not too much bloat in there, will help, as well as kind of the increase of brand as a ranking factor. So Google understanding that a good brand should be shown rather than just someone who's good at SEO, because the two aren't mutually exclusive. typically, you know, people who are good at SEO sometimes aren't necessarily the best at offering customer service, for example. So Google's getting better and better at that. And they're also getting better at knowing us more personally at a deeper level and understanding our daily habits. And what they want to do is give us what we need before we know we need it. And I think we're probably a little way off that being mainstream now, but I guess if you've ever got in your car and it's popped up that it's going to take you 20 minutes to get home in the current traffic conditions, that's kind of that giving us what we need before we know we need it in action day to day. Now, I haven't told Google specifically where I work, and I haven't told Google specifically where I live, but it knows. And now, you know, an evolution of that is the Google Assistant. So as we saw in the latest Google conference, you know, they were quite, they were wanting to show off their Google AI assistant, and it's been well documented about the AI booking of hairdresser's appointments. And that was really quite cool. But again, I think we're a little way off that becoming mainstream as such. But the Google Assistant, which is technically not the search engine, but we'll probably see a convergence of the two at some point in the future.
Absolutely. Yeah. Sorry to interrupt you, because what you're mentioning reminds me of something that was mentioned some years ago, but I think it's happened now. Your second point about this idea of a website may have been well optimized, but if there are some correlating information out there about complaints about their customer service and so on, this website could be demoted because Google would not want to present a business that has a reputation of poor customer service. Are you seeing that they're using AI and correlation to say, well, there's a claim from the business, they do amazing things, but customers are expressing their views very differently, and they're paying attention to that? Yeah,
probably. And again, you know, the whole thing about SEO is that nobody actually knows, but we get kind of little hints and tips and what I've been based on experience. But definitely, you know, the use of reviews in Google has certainly been mooted by some of the Google insiders that say, you know, we're going to look at those sorts of things because we want to show the best businesses for a search. And the best business doesn't necessarily mean somebody who knows how to subvert and kind of reverse engineer an algorithm to increase their visibility for a spurious website. So, you know, lots of affiliate sites that just are literally gateway pages to the actual organization, they took a big hit over the more recent past. So it's about Google understanding brand as a factor, and brand includes reviews as well. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah, because and the reason I was bringing this up, because you helped me with my kind of suppose pitch to many business owners and marketers around this idea of it's SEO plus online reputation. Yeah. So and those two kind of go hand in hand, you know, really, really well. So I'm going to mention AI because that's been probably the last 3 years now that Google says it's part and parcel of everything that they do. The one thing that surprised me, I suppose every year with a Google conference, there's like a central theme. And this year, the one that almost took me by surprise, but shouldn't have, was voice.
Okay.
And what was your reaction to how much they're putting into investing in voice search, in voice recognition, and all those things?
So I think voice is still in its relative infancy, but it's a really interesting development, obviously. And now we're getting kind of, I guess, socially used to people talking randomly, walking down the street to what appears to be nobody, right? So I guess culturally, it's becoming more the norm. But the majority of voice search still takes place on kind of home devices. So things like the Echo, the Apple HomePod, Google Home, those sorts of things. And typically people will use that as an initial kind of action. But then the next step that they will take is to either call a business or visit their website. So it still proves that, you know, we're still a long way from voice becoming the totally submersive experience. So I also feel there's a bit of a generational gap too as well, you know. So my parents, just to give you kind of a brief insight into my family life, is that, you know, my parents recently, as in the last couple of months, got an Amazon Echo, and they use Alexa all the time now, and they absolutely love it. But it's never going to replace anything that's more visual, right? So it's a linear kind of process that says, well, if you want some information about something, so, you know, I guess where's my closest garage, or where's the nearest McDonald's, or, you know, what's the height of Everest, or informational searches such as that, or navigational searches as, take me to the metro centre from my office, those sorts of things voice search are really strong at. But I'm never going to use voice search to book my next summer holiday, or find out the next pair of shoes that I want to wear, or anything like that. So I think from a transactional point of view, from a more visual sense, it tends to be less used. Whereas if you're just perhaps replacing, I don't know, some dishwasher tablets, then a transactional sense voice search comes into its own. And we first got the inclination that Google were preparing themselves for voice search with Hummingbird back in 2013. So 6 years ago, Google made massive changes to its infrastructure in order to understand kind of natural language. So I was looking at some research just the other week, actually, that says we will type typically, the average person will type typically about 38 words per minute, yet we'll talk about 125 to 150 words per minute. So the difference between how we type and search and how we speak and search is very different. So we're more likely to be far more elaborate with our use of language. Of course, there are subtle nuances and colloquialisms between even local variances in, for instance, what is a stotty cake versus a scone. Do you know what I mean? So even in the English language in England, there are subtle kind of differences around that. So that was the first thing back in 2013. And now, as you mentioned, it's AI, which Google called RankBrain, which is largely rolled out about 3 years ago. RankBrain is supposedly running around about 15% of searches that have never been done before. And typically a lot of those searches that have never been done before happen on a voice device. Okay, so we're more likely to use those longer phrases. But I guess, in terms of how to prepare for it, I suppose, because it is coming in and it only will, it's not going away anywhere, is it? My kids search for everything through voice. So again, whilst they are not used to typing, perhaps me and the slightly older generation are definitely used to typing. So in terms of how to prepare for it, we want to get something called the featured snippet. So you might have seen that's where Google calls out. So position 0 now. So, that's another point we should make. Position 1 on a search engine is now not the best position you can have, but everyone kind of elusive. Everybody wants to be number 1, but now we need to be the so-called position 0. So it calls out an answer to a query in its own separate box, and you might have seen that. It's called the answer box. So I guess in order to stand a chance of gaining those positions, you have to have well-written, well-structured content so that Google can match an answer with a query, exactly, as well as answering those queries that may well be associated with it. So those people also ask questions. We can look at those. So, for example, if I search for how tall is the Eiffel Tower, I might also want to know when was it built and what was the cost of the build and how many people does it take and how high does it go from a lift and how many number of steps, and all those other associated pieces of information and facts, actually, that may be useful. So in answering that initial question, we also answer and try and predict the follow-on questions that people may then go on to answer, and coming back to this notion of Google wants to give us what we need before we know we need it. So if I've searched for how tall is the Eiffel Tower, it's certainly useful for me to know those other facts as well. So I guess from a voice search point of view, we've got to make sure that we have well-written, well-structured content that Google can access that answers a question. If that makes sense.
And absolutely. And to your point, that's been something that you and I have been promoting through the workshops and speaking engagement, which is you're better off being seen to explore something thoroughly by answering multiple questions about the same subject area than being superficial and covering lots of different areas but answering just the one questions. Both from a reputation point of view, but of course from an SEO point of view. So you reminded us very kindly that Google, whilst a free service to others, from a marketing point of view, I'm dealing with a commercial entity. I've got to respect that. Secondly, they want to provide a better service all of the time. They want to retain their pole position. So they're looking at not just the quality of your effort on the site itself, because essentially if you're well informed, you could try and rank highly whilst providing a service, but there's correlation between what others say. They've gone for mobile first. So I wanted to ask a question about that. Is it possible, therefore, again, so let's say that my the mobile version of my website is not performing so well, but my desktop version is okay, but can you see a long-term penalty that is to say, even though my desktop version is fine, because we're moving towards a mobile-first world, the fact that my mobile version is has a poorer experience, the whole of my online presence is penalized?
No, basically. So I think, you know, if your mobile site isn't doing very well, then Google has told us and came out and said quite publicly that it will just not show highly on mobile results.
Okay.
So, but if I'm a local restaurant or a hairdresser's or a service station or a car garage, people are more likely to use their mobile devices for those types of searches. So that goes for to say that if you are that type of business, i.e. a local business that relies on local trade, if your mobile site isn't particularly well optimized, then typically the whole of your digital presence will be penalized for that, because the majority of your digital presence is on mobile.
Got it.
So, but Google has come out and said, you know, you will be reduced visibility in mobile results only, but I think that probably will change if it hasn't changed already over time, if you see what I mean. So, but it's definitely, you know, we're in a mobile first world. We use mobile devices, and mobile isn't just a phone, by the way. Mobile is a tablet, mobile is potentially a watch, mobile, remember the Google Glass project? That was probably way ahead of its time, actually, and when I used them, it was a bit weird, but, you know, they will make an appearance sometime soon. I'm sure of it, and, you know, that's all about kind of wearable technology that will access the Google ecosystem. So, yeah.
Yeah, the Google Glass, now I was getting excited thinking, that's it, we've reached the cyberpunk you know, phase, but not quite there. We'll have to wait for the film. Yeah. The other thing was, so before we move on, Ben, can we just pause for a moment? I can ask you, what would be, in your view, the essentials? Non-negotiables, do that first, and then we can start to leap ahead into 2020. What are the essentials for you?
So even in, you know, the 10 years that I've been doing SEO now, the essentials remain exactly the same. You've got to have a site that's technically well written, so that Google can access the pages, that it can take them away and then index them. It can then understand the content that's contained within those pages, so that it can file it away on its servers for recall at a future date. So that, you know, I guess just to make the distinction that, you know, for people who don't know, is that when you do a search on Google, you don't actually search the internet, you search Google's database, in essence. So if your site isn't being accessed by Google and then indexed and then has content that Google can understand, it's less likely to be shown on high up on a search page. So from a technical point of view, you know, that's making sure the site has a good hierarchy and follows a logical pattern and path. You know, there are no dead pages, so any 404 pages that lead down kind of a cul-de-sac, for example. Making sure you've got a sitemap in place so that Google can quite easily and quickly understand all of the pages on your website, as well as many other technical factors in there. So from a technical point of view, make sure the site's sound. I guess make sure there's a decent amount of content on each page. So I guess, you know, note the word decent. Google actually used the word satisfying amount of main content. So even Google themselves don't give you like a prescriptive limit of saying, you know, you have to have 300 words on your page or whatever. So anyone that says, you know, blog post has to have 500 words from an SEO point of view, are kind of merely plucking an arbitrary figure out of the air, basically, right? So I guess the main rule of thumb that we work to when we're talking about content is, does this concisely, but in detail, answer the query sufficiently? Now that might take us 100 words, that might take us 1,000 words, and that's based around, I guess, the complexity of the subject matter. So if we're talking about, you know, dare I say it, Brexit, well, they say never go to politics, don't they? But, you know, if we're talking about Brexit and the ins and outs of the backstop and all that sort of stuff, then that's going to take more to explain. So you need to go in that detail, and it needs to have that expansiveness in order to understand the full detail of the subject. Whereas if it's, you know, how to clean a pair of brown shoes with a leather cleaner, you might be able to get that within 100 words or 200 words. So yeah, so Google use the word satisfying amount. So they don't give us any form of prescriptive limit. But that is to say, you need to have enough content that Google can understand the context of everything that you're working towards. Okay, so from a content point of view, and then once your site's got a good technical foundation, once the site's got good content that's well written, well structured, then you need to make sure that the reputation, so we talk about the word reputation, is on a good standing and continues to increase. And the way that you can do that is through getting external websites and high authority sources linking back to your website. So to give you an example here, UMI is an incredibly high authority, credible organization. The UMI website will point a link back to Digital Ally's website, which makes our credibility and reputation greater, in essence. And it's about the process of continuing that. So I usually explain it in kind of an analogy around an election. So, your website is akin to having a well-written, well-structured manifesto that appeals to an audience. So you've got to sell to that audience. But that manifesto is useless unless you have the votes to back that up. And Google take each link from an external website back to your website, technically like a vote of confidence. So I guess, the essentials have remained the same pretty much for 10 years. And will continue to do so because that's the fundamental way that Backrub, as it was originally called, which then became Google, that's what it was built on. It was built around the principle of, we've got all this content that's contained within these books in the library. Some are more popular than others. How do we work that out? And that still remains to this day.
Yeah, it reminds me. Back in the days when I used to do the basic training to SEO, I used to tell the story of the real reason behind it. Essentially, both a bit of laziness and wanted to spend more time in the student bar by only finding the books that others had read and found useful. I think there was that.
That's right.
So you're right. The essentials have not changed for the last 10 years. So I suppose if we were to represent, our business owners and marketers here today, why therefore is it still so tricky to understand it, or why is it still so, was it still explained in a very convoluted way? I mean, we don't, you and I and many others out there, champions of simplicity and transparency, but in general, as a practice and discipline, it's been poorly explained or hard to understand.
I think so. So in essence, there is only Google who are in control of those results. Okay, so whilst we as professionals can do all we can to help increase visibility, there is nobody that can guarantee that. And I think in the past there have been organizations that would guarantee that, and they would shroud the whole thing in mystery so that, people wouldn't ask questions and search too deeply. I think with the advent of time and over the course of time, as the internet has become a place of information and knowledge, I think those boundaries have come down. So we do have a far more educated marketplace right now. Absolutely. We have a more sophisticated buyer, without a doubt. But I think in terms of that shroud of mystery, I think it's certainly people who try and do that are possibly, I say possibly, being a little less scrupulous. Certainly our approach is one of education, and one of telling people what we're doing and why we're doing it. And, I guess that's kind of it's just the way we work. And I think a lot of people in the SEO industry are now moving towards that as well. So, yeah.
No, of course, absolutely. So let's move on then. So we've got the essentials. We put no barriers, obstacles in the way for the Google to scan the website using the infamous spiders. The content is relevant. The content is detailed, what's remaining concise. And others concur by pointing back to it or promoting it in some ways. So these are the essentials. What are the lesser known or lesser used tactics that could help us leap forward in 2020?
Yeah, so I guess there are two main areas that we would tend to focus on once all those kind of boxes have been ticked, and it is pretty much a tick box exercise. But as part of the technical makeup of the website, lots of people overlook structured data. I'll go on to explain what that is in a second. And also we focus a lot around the user experience. So they tend to be two, one aids increased visibility in the websites, in the search engines, which in turn should then drive traffic. And the latter, the user experience, then improves the dwell time, which in turn allows Google to understand that the user is having a good experience on this website. So therefore, it's more likely to improve or show that website again. So it's like reinforcing good behavior. So, whenever I'm trying to train the dog or train the kids for that matter, you reinforce the good behavior. You don't necessarily penalize the bad behavior. Sorry. So that's kind of one there. So the main one that we see, which is often overlooked, is the use of structured data. So, or schema markup, as it's sometimes referred to. So that's where the content of the site is broken down into various different micro elements so that Google can understand the component parts of that piece of content, right? So take example, which is a widely used one, of a recipe. So instead of just loading up all of my content in one bulk and saying, here's the recipe, here's the time that it takes, here's all the ingredients you use, here's how well people like it in terms of ratings and reviews and such like, and loading those into what's called P tags, we should split all of that out into the various elements by using those schemas available, and there are thousands of them, and don't ask me all of them because I don't know. So if you were to do a search for any form of recipe, such as like one of my own personal favorites, like a beef Wellington. So if you were to search for a beef Wellington, what Google pulls out, and typically one of the best sites that uses structured data in the best way that I would use as an example is the BBC Good Food site. So it displays the ratings, the number of votes that rating is based on. It shows you the time taken to prepare and cook that recipe, as well as calorific content, the recipe itself, and with an image. Now, all of those single elements are pulled out as separate pieces of content. So that Google understands that that is the calorie content and not just a number with a word next to it. It understands that that is a time taken to cook a recipe rather than how long it might take to prepare, if you see what I mean. So, and there are loads of that. And if people listening want to go onto a website, the best one to go to is schema.org. That's schema.org, and find out what they are. The most common ones tend to be organization, tend to be ratings, products, events, movies, and so on. So I guess that's where so having schema doesn't necessarily increase your rankings, right? But what it does do is it allows for more richer results that mean that a click-through is more likely, which means that it's serving a better result, if you see what I mean. So it's a more complete listing, if you like, and you find people don't use those.
Thanks very much for reminding us of that, because it's a lovely evolution, I think, of the meta tags. I think it's one way to look at it as well. And for our viewers and listeners, these will be all those kind of media-rich vignettes or little cards that you see appearing from time to time that really drive someone's attention in and around answering questions. And I think if you've taken the trouble to pull together some very important content to you, particularly around advice, around anything that helps somebody be more informed, make things clearer, that extra bit of time to label those different elements, is definitely worth your while. And if it's not your thing, just find a technical friend that can do that for you. But judging by, I think, if I'm not mistaken, 2-3 years in a row now, Google mentioned it in workshops, specific workshops during their conference, which suggests that it's important to them.
Well, it makes their job easier. I mean, at the last kind of publicly available figure, it was something like Google said they had 130 trillion pages in its index, right? So by using, and that was about 3 years ago, so that will have been increased by then, no doubt, absolutely. So by making sure that we break down the component parts of our content, we're making Google's job a little easier in understanding what that context is and its relevancy, and also making it easier to show more useful results. And schema is not just a Google thing. Schema is a culmination of Google, Bing, Yahoo, and Yandex, which is the biggest search engine in Russia, as it happens, and pulling together and saying this is a collective best practice that, as the main search engines across the vast majority of the world, we're going to use this standard to show different results. So, it's not just a Google thing, it's also a Bing, Yahoo, and others as well. So, yeah.
So we've got, you had two, not you had, so this is the first one, the rich data markup. What else did you want us to look into?
We take time to improve and enhance the user experience. So again, typically most SEOs are focused on driving traffic to a website, and that tends to be borne out in KPIs such as we need to increase our rankings by X, and we need to increase sessions from organic traffic, organic search engines by Y. Now, and what sometimes gets forgotten about is, well, what happens when we drive people there? It's not good enough to take the horse to water, to put it in a cliche. We have to now make that horse drink, and in doing so, what we're doing is we're maybe increasing the time on site. We're looking at the greater number of pages per session, because what that does is, again, and that reinforces to Google that when it does show this website or this page or whatever, people go on it, so they click on it. So click-through rate is a widely known correlating factor. And then when people do actually get on the website, we can make sure that they have a good experience. So, I would put it this way: if you were recommending a restaurant to a friend, and that friend came back and said, "Look, I've had a terrible meal there," actually, you're less likely to recommend that restaurant to future friends, because that's you. And Google operates in exactly the same principle. If it promotes a web page and people go on and have a negative experience, excuse me, it's less likely to promote that website in future. Okay, so by making sure that we focus around the user experience, it's far more likely that Google will show it in the future. So delving a little deeper into the quality of traffic rather than just getting traffic for traffic's sake, in our experience, has proved to pay dividends in the relative short term, at least.
Can you think of an example or two, recent ones, where you made some small adjustment, because usually that's where they are. You made a small adjustment and it really took that website further forward. Can you think of something that comes to mind?
I think, it's difficult because, the thing with SEO is that there are over well-known, documented 200 different factors. So trying to pinpoint and saying we did that one thing and it had a marked improvement is very, very difficult. And I think people quite often go down into that alley and say, we've got a social media feed there and our rankings improved, so therefore the correlating factor of having a social media presence and our increased rankings is true, when in fact it isn't. So there is no kind of causal direct impact between having a social media presence and improving rankings. So I think in essence, we have shown that as part of a wider approach that we take around the technical and content aspects, we are able to, as a whole, lift the visibility of a website. But it would be, I guess, remiss of me to say we only change the user experience and therefore we're able to directly correlate that with improved rankings, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. I was more looking at, I suppose, an opportunity on the spot there, the example whereby, let me phrase it differently. When you look at the website for the first time, when you have a new client, are there some common little issues or common kind of thread you go, yeah, that's typically what people do with a homepage, or that's typically what they do with their landing page, and actually if you tweak it slightly, that's going to improve the user experience?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I guess, so typically what do we see? We usually see that, if users have a blog or clients have a blog, and that blog is visible in the search engines, and people read the bottom of that blog post and then reach the end of that post and there's no other redirection or signpost enough to perhaps a service page or the next article or a previous article or stuff like that, people just come in, read the article and then leave. So, that tends to be the most common one that we'd see. There was one example actually where we did the total opposite. We went in and one of our KPIs was to reduce the time on site and to reduce the number of pages, because the site's hierarchy was an absolute nightmare. So to actually find stuff, people were having a negative experience on the site, even though the KPIs of a time on site and number of pages views were high, our goal was to reduce those so that the experience itself was better and people could find the information that we're looking for quickly, if you see what I mean. So yeah, there's no one right thing to do.
No, but I like this idea of, that's what I mean. It was a small thing that it's a simple thing to miss or have an oversight. So as we think about next year, and as I think about the kind of advice and the kind of question I get during the workshops, I want to go back to link building, which you mentioned, earlier in the conversation. And I'm wondering whether you've seen good tactics to secure that vote, to use your term. What is it that people need to put a bit more effort in to get that link to their website?
So I guess for us, not only speak for ourselves, link building is a fairly for some contentious topic. So even the phrase link building has been replaced by content marketing and that sort of stuff. So if we're going back in the day, people would buy loads of links from SEO directories or blog farms, which are just basically sites that were generated to create links. But obviously when Penguin came along back in 2012, 2011, when Penguin came along and penalized all those links, people started moving towards bloggers. So, people going out and giving reviews to bloggers and saying, look, there's some free stuff. Do you mind leaving me a link? That's recently been not necessarily totally disregarded as a tactic, but just, not manipulated as a tactic. So I think, in essence, what best practice link building looks like is to work with good organizations that are relevant to the industry that we're working in, figure out who they are, build a relationship with the people who are running those websites, whether that be editors or webmasters, talk to them about the organization that we are working on behalf of or with or alongside, find out what value we could add to that organization or editor or industry website by giving away some expertise and giving away some thought processes around the latest thinking, that sort of stuff. And only in time can you then say, we've created this piece of content that's really well written, that's really well researched, that you can show to your users and indeed increase your credibility through having associations like ours in an industry expert field and saying, would you mind placing that content on your website and then place a link back to ours? But typically in the SEO world, it's been approached as a transactional relationship. So typically most people will go and say, there's a piece of content that we've written. Do you mind placing it on your website? We'll give you 50 quid and give us a link back. That's a transactional relationship that typically will probably run out in time. Okay. What you've got to do is build up those long-term relationships with organizations that are more likely to feature you time after time after time, and then making sure that they are the big industry experts. So, we have links back from Google, the Digital Allies website. We have links back from Moz, which is one of the biggest widely known SEO blogs and organizations in the world. And the reason that we got those two particularly was by giving away our expertise and making sure that we created something that was of value to a community, which then people who own that community are more likely to share it. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, and it's been listening to is music to my ears, and I know that my colleagues listening be cheering on because, of course, as you know, at UMI, we put a lot of effort in gathering news, in creating inspiring content, educating small business owners and marketers. And what you described is the right way to go about it, and I knew that was going to be, your version would be just on the money. So thanks for that. If I could recommend people, viewers and listeners, I would rewind and listen to that again, because this is just the #1 advice for 2020 with regard to building that online reputation, having done all the things you mentioned prior to that. We're nearly out of time, but before I let you go, I want to abuse of your kindness by asking you some questions we received from the UMI community.
Oh, okay.
So a few days ago, someone asked about Google My Business.
Oh, yeah.
And asked whether it's worth their while because they're very busy and because in their sector it's not utilized much. So are they missing out, or should they pass?
No, they're definitely probably missing out. And I think, so it depends which industry they're in. But I think, Google My Business is your or an organization's way of controlling what Google show about their own organization. So that'd be things like opening hours. You put in when organizations are most busy. You put in your website. You put in different events that you've got on. So Google has spent a lot of time improving the Google My Business interface. So, and it didn't take that long, really. You know, if you set aside an hour or so, sat down at your Google My Business interface, it's fairly intuitive. Input the information that they ask for. One thing I would say is keep up to date with it, though. And again, from a personal experience, we turned up, me, my wife, and kids turned up to a restaurant that was closed, that we thought was open based on the information that Google showed us in their Google My Business listing. So we had to stick around for an hour, and we did because it was a good restaurant. But we had to stick around for an hour because they hadn't updated their opening times in the Google My Business. So one thing of note is, you know, make sure that it's kept up to date as well.
Thank you very much for that. And I mean, you picked up obviously the announcement. Well, the announcement, I think the hints from Google during the conference that they are planning to make Google Maps a social network. What's your take on that?
I think for me, Google Maps is the next thing that they will commercialize. You can already pay for a listing on the maps, and I think, you know, as part of Google My Business, you know, if you look at where can Google increase a yield from each search, it is most definitely in and around the map listings, because, you know, we all have one. We're all kind of encouraged to do so, make sure that it's complete and all that sort of stuff. So once Google's built that inventory and built that reliance on perhaps maps for traffic, if you are a locally based business, they may well introduce I guess a paid for model as a constant rather than an optional as it is now. So yeah.
Yeah, and to listen, if you get the results as a small business, it's going to be pennies well spent, I'd imagine. Yeah. Next question that we got was around any advice about optimizing photos and videos. I'm still struggling from time to time.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I mean, obviously, you know, images tend to be, so we know the page load speed is a vital part of any SEO kind of program, and one of the main kind of protagonists around page speed and what slows it down is image size. And lots of people will take an image on a mobile or a camera, download it and upload it straight on the website without compressing it. So one of the key things is make sure that the I guess the file type is one of the most common ones. So JPEG or PNG tend to be the two that you should focus on. So it's not some spurious file type. Around image optimization, there's a couple of websites that are very easy to use. There's one called Tiny PNG and Tiny JPEG. So you literally drop the file into there and it'll compress. It'll probably remove about 80 to 85% of the file size, but without compromising the quality for web. There's also one called Squoosh, which is SQUOOSH, Squoosh. Again, does a similar sort of thing. So you don't have to be an Adobe expert to be able to compress images and make them good enough for web. Making sure that the image has a caption, making sure that the image also has an alt text. So if the image for whatever reason doesn't load, that anyone using any form of assistive technology such as screen readers, if I'm visually impaired, for example, can still see that it's an image of a brown coffee table rather than image ABC123, which would be the file name. So from an image point of view, I guess they would tend to be the key ones to look at. There are next-gen file formats that if you really wanted to take it to the next level, Google are promoting, but they're not widely undertaken. So they may well disappear, but we'll see.
Yeah, the other I meant was around video, because I'm assuming that that's implicit to talk about YouTube, but have you found ways to make videos optimized?
Yeah, so, you know, video, Google will use video in certain searches. So typically, you know, let's say I'm searching for how to change a tire on a car, for example. You know, stuff where a video would be useful, Google's more likely to show video. So making sure, and it's similar to kind of conventional SEO in that sense, in that making sure that the video has a good title that's relevant and descriptive, making sure that the title matches a description, so you have a broader description of what the video is and what it covers, perhaps. One of the key things that we also talk about in terms of video, if there is a transcript available, to be able to upload that alongside the video really helps Google and YouTube itself actually understand what is contained within that video. So don't forget, you know, Google is a text matching system, so it can't actually physically get into the video file and extract the content. So we have to make sure that we give the content alongside the video. So yeah, I guess, there would be the three key things talking about video. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Well, you mentioning a tiny PNG and JPEG and Squoosh. Then can I use that as a link to ask you if I wanted to refresh my SEO toolkit, for want of a better description? Do you have any suggestions about how just to kind of change what I've been doing, maybe have some better tools?
Yeah, I mean, so we have two kind of approaches. We have ones that we pay for, and we have ones that are free. Typically, the ones that we pay for will have free trials or limited versions for free. And there are many of them. The SEO software world is just growing exponentially. So the ones that we tend to use that are in our stack, if you want to put it in that way, we use Majestic SEO, which is, we look at our links database. It's probably got one of the widest links databases. It's a tool called Screaming Frog, which is where we use to crawl websites. We use another one called Ahrefs, which is a more complete SEO tool, as well as one called Systrix, and then one called Little Warden. So they are our kind of paid software that we use, and all have various different strengths. We are yet to find one that is really solid across the whole SEO spectrum. So hence we use a few. So they tend to be the paid ones that we use. From a free point of view, we use Google Search Console. So making sure that people know about and use and access Google Search Console. Google Analytics, of course, as well, helps us in our SEO efforts. A couple of page speeds kind of tools that we use, one called GT Metrics, and the Google Page Speed tool itself, which of course is free. There's another one called the Structured Data Testing tool, which rolls off the tongue very easily. So the Structured Data Testing tool, again, you can just drop your URL in there, and Google will tell you if you've got structured data in your website, because again, it's a big part. And then one of the key ones that we use as well around site security is called Why No Padlock. Again, around site security, which is so important these days as well. So they are the ones that we tend to use as part of our arsenal.
Well, thanks very much for that. I want to make sure that we put the hyperlinks in the show notes for our viewers and listeners. But appreciate you taking the time. All right, then. Final question for you. It's 2020.
Yeah.
You guys are doing very well, of course. What do you think you'd be working on for your customers next year? What would be the new services or new demands on digital allies over the next 12 to 18 months, do you think?
I think for us, it's going to be around, particularly around websites for people as website technology has moved on. Website technology has moved on alongside Google Advances as well. So I think that's going to be a big rise in how we develop and move what we know as a website. I think that's going to change a little bit as well. I think from an SEO point of view, I think it's going to be fairly similar to, unless there's anything that I don't know about, of course, and I'm not Google itself, so forgive me that one. But I think it's focusing around making sure that the good components are taken care of, those three essential elements, making sure that we are set up and aware of voice and working towards it as part of an underlying part of strategy. I think still around local SEO. So Google is getting better at figuring out what we want out of our search, so the intent, as well as trying to figure out all of those different personalization factors, which are coming in as well. So I think, in terms of next year, it'll still be 80% of our work will still be what we're doing today. And I think, the remaining 20% of the work will be adaptive and responsive based on the changes that come out, so yeah.
Excellent. Well, listen, this has been really, really enjoyable and very insightful. Thank you for jumping on, and thank you for our live viewers and those who are watching on replay. I'm sure they'll agree that it's been really helpful. If any of our viewers and listeners have follow-up questions, where can they find out more about you, and where can they get in touch with you?
Well, of course, our website, digitalallies.co.uk. There's a couple of other places I would point people to if they wanted some self-directed learning. Places like Search Engine Watch, Search Engine Land. For those of you who of the Twitter persuasion, follow guys like Danny Sullivan or John Mueller, who are kind of the Google insiders. They come out and give you kind of little tidbits of information. But yeah, for us, we're based down in Gateshead on the Team Valley, and that's our web address, and you can get in touch with us across all social channels, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, email. Yeah, we're fairly widely contactable.
Excellent. Thank you so much. To you, our viewers and listeners, thank you for your ongoing support. We will publish this video very, very shortly on the weareumi.co.uk website. If you have questions, do send them to Stephen. If you have suggestions for other topics, other guests, do send them to me and to my colleagues at weareumi.co.uk. Until next time, go out there and make some amazing content. Bye-bye for now.
Thanks, Pascal. Bye.